Thank you, Joyce. And thank you so much, panelists. I know that I took many curious notes here, lots of interesting comments that were shared. Um, even as I was processing the impacts of digital twins and what that could mean from a human dimension. But as we transition now to our final panel for today's event, we're here to talk about AI in facilities. So once the rubber meets the road, how do we move forward with operations and renovations in federal buildings leveraging AI? Um, and so, hello again. I'm Fernando Arias, founder and principal consultant of Carbon Smart Strategies. Earlier, you heard a little bit about me and my expertise of over 20 years in sustainable architecture, operations, and construction, and also an avid adopter and advisor for AI strategies. In this session, I'm excited to bring together some of the most esteemed experts and practitioners that we know of in our GBAC community to explore how AI can play a transformative role in optimizing facility operations for federal buildings and beyond. I'd like to invite all speakers to come on camera and briefly introduce themselves, starting with Kiva, then Larry, then Tim, and share your name, your role, your org, and one fun work-related milestone or proud fact that helps the attendees here today get to know you better.
All right. So thanks a lot for having us here today, Fernando. I am Kiva Rodriguez. I am a member of GBAC, but my day job includes my role as Chief Operating Officer for the Maryland Aviation Administration. But most people know that as BWI Marshall Airport, where we serve both Baltimore and Washington, and we are the 22nd largest airport in the National Capital Region, as well as our general aviation airport, Martin State Airport, which is about 10 miles north of downtown Baltimore. So that is my day job. And I guess something that's really exciting that's happening for us, and it really ties to the discussion regarding future planning. Well, we just experienced our second record-breaking month of travel capacity and growth for our passengers. So we're excited to see what the rest of the year will bring, especially with the upcoming holiday season. And I'm sure that we will have an engaging conversation today. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Kiva. Yeah, you must be busy today as well because of all of the different changes going on with work travel. Larry, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Fernando, and great to be here. Great to see everybody. Fun discussions. Larry Melton, CEO and founder of the Building People. I will first say 24-year career in GSA, much like Steve Hagan, 10 years in business. Little tidbit that I'm super proud of, Washington Business Journal top 125 company in the Washington, D.C. metro area announced this week. 7-time fastest growing company in America. And I think the one thing in these discussions and what we're hearing today, the 450 plus employees at the Building People are super passionate about all the stuff we're talking about. We're in 40 states. GSA is one of our key stakeholder partners and customers that we love to work for. I'm excited to talk about, where the industry is going. This is why we created the Building People. This is the foundation for what we're trying to transform in the industry. And I'd like to, as we get through the conversations, we're going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing and the excitement of it. But just great to be here and a lot to talk about in the next hour.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Larry. And Tim, joining us, from probably the very changing environment over at Nashville Airport. Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I'm Tim Underwood. I'm the Executive Director of the National Association of Energy Service Companies. And I've been in this role for about 6 years. And if you've met me, you know that I'm passionate about the energy service industry. My background has been an engineer for an ESCO. I spent many years, 8 years at the Department of Energy, running the Federal Energy Management Program, as well as the renewable power research area. Our industry has a significant impact on the federal building marketplace, where we do a significant amount of retrofits. Back when I was in the federal government, we initiated the thing called the President's Performance Contracting Challenge, where we were able to accomplish $4 billion of building improvements over a 5-year period with no new government money for that. What's great about that is that effort actually had a roll-on effect in the next 4 years after we completed it. We saw $1 billion a year each year of further building retrofits because of the momentum that we started. We're here to try to start that momentum again, and I think AI has an opportunity to help us try to get that to a honed, better performance than what we ever thought we could. Thanks.
That's music to my ears, Tim. I'm glad you brought that up. So listen, I thought Tim is trying to protect his bandwidth by going off camera intermittently, but he's still joining us here in the conversation. So I want to go ahead and tee up this one question for all the panelists and invite you all to, react to each other as well. But first question, what are the most significant challenges you've encountered when integrating AI into building operations or renovation projects, and how have you addressed them?
I'm happy to chime in there, Fernando. So it's interesting as we were prepping for this entire event, and then when you look at just what we've been talking about all morning since the first session, we talked about the problem statement, AI, technology, all the technology and systems were part of the conversation. And we heard several panelists talk about the complexities of it and adopting it, right? And I think adoption is probably the most complex piece to any technology as we've seen in the industry. But it's not a coincidence. The second conversation was around design and construction. And it's interesting that the third piece is now facilities operation. When you see that, really to me, it's the epitome of what we've seen of what I call the three-legged stool of complexity of any major change that we're dealing with technology innovation. It's the problem statement, the technology itself, and the adoption between the two organizations that either A, build it or operate it, right? So it's probably not a coincidence that you'll hear from me that say the number one thing that I see across the industry, both in the decades that I spent both in government and even 10 years now, supporting multiple, 10, 15, 20 agencies, the same problem occurs, and it's the organizational alignment across, whether it's the CIO, the construction, the facilities organizations, or the program office, even real estate, and more importantly now, even HR. I think several members talked about the importance of privacy of data, privacy of information, of whether it's the people in the building, around the building, or operating the building, and then the data of the building. But I think don't be misled that just because we're 10 years, 15 years into this journey of AI, and we are, and machine learning, the complexity of all of it is around the people at the end of the day. And I think organizational alignment and getting each of the organizations aligned with one goal in mind, whether it's the policy, the systems, and the authorities that come with it, to me, that's single-handedly the biggest obstacle we still see. We saw it, in the evolution and the starting foundation when GSA was at the forefront in 2008 of starting smart buildings. Even to today, it's if we're talking to whether it's new clients or new prospective folks that want to adopt smart buildings, the first piece is, well, I want to do this, but I need help from the CIO, or I need help from the finance team, the CFO. Everyone wants a return on investment. Everybody wants the results right now. Everybody wants the energy savings. But, the reality is getting everybody organizational aligned first is, to me, the number one piece. And that's really how we've addressed it. We go in very, very systematically looking at the organization, whether you go in facilities, whether it's construction or the CIO or CFO, you got to go in and look at it holistically as the organization. And I know Steve in the group earlier talked about the total life cycle. It's the same thing in operations. When you're looking at the adoption of technologies, you have to look at the entire life cycle of the organization and figure out who are all the stakeholders. You've got a champion, but the stakeholders. So I think the number one challenge we still see, even though I would like to say we're further along and everyone's working in unison, is the organizational alignment and the adoption of what that looks like. And I'm sure we'll get into that a little more.
I would have to agree. It's funny. I'm normally the very talkative one, so I tried to get Lawrence or somebody else to talk first. But I think that response was right on target. I mean, for us, it would be the culture shift. So as a state agency, we rely heavily on private companies, contractors, consultants. I spent about almost 16 years of my career up front working as a consultant and supporting federal government, local government, and state government. But now as a state government employee and someone at the executive level of management and leadership, what I understand is that it takes time for government to adapt and adopt the changes that are happening with technology, whether that be through policy and implementation, or through training and preparation, so that staff can interact with the data. That's something that I see being a pretty substantial challenge, which is, again, just creating the culture shift and having everyone on board with what is going on. So now that we basically have about, I'd say, a half dozen architecture, engineering, and design firms under contract, and each may have their own AI solution to help us to design or even to analyze solutions for our projects. We need to create an environment where our staff feels comfortable engaging with the data and understanding how it can be helpful and impactful for what we're trying to accomplish. So I totally agree that it's a matter of understanding where we are in that culture shift and what we can do to continue to support clients through that.
Well, I'll follow along with the same as our previous speakers. It's really an adoption type of issue for our industry. Is ESCO projects and construction projects in general, they're rushed. They have a tight time schedule, and sorry about the airline announcement. It's happening right when I'm talking. The ESCO industry is challenged by the fact they're trying to incorporate that in their projects.
Yeah, and it's all of your comments are calling up for me, not only like Larry was saying, the people dynamics of this and the behavior change and the adoptions things happen, but I'm remembering also the presentation earlier by NVIDIA where the graph was shown with the little spigot of water and these bars that were scaling up, and Sean Young was talking about how essentially the frontier is really being absorbed by the architectural community. And then I saw the second bar was legal, or the legal space. It makes me think a lot about how some of the most significant challenges are really just establishing what are those guardrails, what are the parameters by which we want to adopt AI in any kind of application. And so I feel like that's one piece. I think that the challenges right now are gathering information, educating folks on exactly what AI is and how to use it, and giving folks an opportunity to test it at small scales to get a lot of user feedback rapidly to better understand the feasibility of establishing more formal policies. So, so as I move into any other questions before or responses before I move into another question.
And if I can just add, as a great example, Tim, it's great to see you as usual. And maybe I'll just give Tim a little bit of a plug about when we talk about early adoption, and Tim's absolutely right. I'm going to rewind the clock to 2008, and Tim was at Department of Energy. I was at GSA, just to give you a perspective of how important that adoption is, even across government agencies and public sector agencies. To Kiva's point, is that when we launched the Smart Buildings program very, very early on, we knew we couldn't do it without the help of Department of Energy, and we knew that was a major stakeholder. So there's so many ways to skin the cat. And when you really look at it, the reality is that it's not just within your organization, but it's government wide. And I would just challenge, I know there's a lot of government executives on this call, across agencies, and I would just encourage folks to say, well, who are the stakeholders that can be big influencers for where I'm trying to move the business needle? And I will say Tim was a huge influential impact when we were trying to do that in the early stages of GSA when he was over at DOE. And I think that's one thing when we look back, people ask me often, like, what was the secret sauce of making things happen? It was agencies partnering together for one big cause. And I think that was probably a huge ability for us to kind of pour gas on the fire, so to speak. But the other piece I would just like to emphasize is that, we always use the adage of an acronym, and maybe I can find the chat or the link and I'll put it in the chat for reference, but Rogers adoption curve, where we talk about the early adopters and the laggards, right? And really every organization and every system of implementation goes through this. So I use that as an example because I think it's a great education and tool and soundbite, and I'll see if I can find the link. I'll put it in there for people to reference. But Rogers adoption curve really talks about the need for change, and really, how do you move the business needle for adoption in these situations when you're trying to make major change? How do you do it, and how do you transform organizations? So it's a great reference point.
Yeah. And, Larry, earlier in my segment about the baselining, I talked a little bit about how AI can translate things into different languages for different user types. And I think that when it comes to cross-agency facilitation and workshops and trainings and giving folks access to different tools and letting them try things, I think AI can be very integral to ensuring that there are fair pathways and ladders of opportunity to accessing these tools, because it can translate and convert information that can be accessible to so very many people. So I think that's an important point that I want to underscore there. My next question, Tim, I know you're out there in the exciting space of Nashville Airport, but let me see if you can hear me. If not, I'm gonna move over to somebody else. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes, sir. From the perspective,
Fernando, before we leave that last subject, we had a lot of talk on that.
bring it.
Was when I talk about the adoption of this, it's got to be something that can easily slide into place for the companies doing these project development. They're under a tight time schedule. They have a lot of things to get done, and adding another burden without adding any more time schedule to complete is a challenge. Now, obviously, we know that AI is actually going to speed that process, but in the adoption phase, it's probably going to slow it down.
Well, actually, that's a really good point as we transition to ask you this thing about ESCOs. So from the perspective of energy service companies, what are the most promising future applications of AI in enhancing not just energy efficiency in federal buildings, but other processes here? Because you're just getting right at the heart of it, which is there may be a bit of a learning curve where there's a steep, slowdown at the beginning, but it gets faster towards the middle and the end.
Yeah, so from an energy service company perspective, they're talking, I'm not going to talk about the project development. We've heard a lot about that. We had some great presentation, Virginia with Autodesk. I had great points about the project development, so I'll skip that. Those obviously are applicable to our industry. But the side that we don't talk about is when we talk about performance. So you think about all these project manuals that get put together. How does a site person analyze those and use those? Well, AI can help to provide a more sleek process to where they can receive the information that they need from that manuals that's been incorporated into an AI model. Site safety, when you have safety models that can come in and predict where we think we're going to have safety issues on a site, we can improve the safety of the overall site. But now getting to performance, when we think about the projects and they're going to be consuming energy, we take that data of how did we not make energy savings on projects in the past? Well, it's equipment performance, it's people changing parameters. And so you think of all those pieces fed into a model can then provide us a front-end approach, kind of like that McLeamy curve we saw earlier, a front-end approach to fixing performance, not just design, but now performance, to where we can actually make sure that we train up front of what we think are going to be the common expected problems in the future. And we kind of do that now, but it's a little bit more of anecdotally. An AI model could help clarify that so that we know exactly what the problem is, and we know exactly how much impact each of those problems that we know have on the subsequent energy savings on a project. So when we think of the energy efficiency, we have to think of project performance.
Yeah. And when I hear energy efficiency, of course, I also hear savings from a cost perspective. So I do think that AI could help not only more predictive rates and stabilization for the consumer side and the institutional side, but also from the energy generation and distribution side. So a lot of equity related to the provision of energy as a whole. Kiva, I want to work with you on this point. And I have a question for you that's about how AI influences your approach to life cycle cost analysis and material selection in renovation projects. And can you discuss a project where AI significantly impacted decision making?
Yeah, so making sure I'm off mute here. Great. Okay. So once again, BWI Marshall and Martin State Airport, just to kind of set the stage, the Maryland Aviation Administration is one of 5 modes of transportation that's managed under the Maryland Department of Transportation. And within MAA, once again, our mission is to own and operate both those airports, but also we have another component, which is a regulatory component for 34 of our regional airports. So that just kind of sets the stage. So with our airports, you know, we are always striving to be proactive instead of reactive. And like how we design our projects will determine our ability to be proactive. So creating opportunities for asset data collection will help us to maintain a state of good repair for all of our infrastructure, addressing our facility needs and our pavement needs. And pavement is a huge deal at an airport. If we don't have good quality pavement, the planes cannot take off and they cannot land safely. So that's very important, and it really helps to, you know, collect that data and make sure that we're streamlining it as best as we can to address everything all at once. So doing so can cause a significant disruption to our airline partners and our passengers if we're not able to do that. You know, if we're trying to conduct any kind of facility updates or infrastructure, you know, rehabilitation, and if we don't have the information that we need in order to do that, and if we don't, or if we are not able to put together a comprehensive program to address those needs, it really can disrupt our entire operation. So it's in our best interest to be proactive. So we use the data that's available to us, and we make decisions with the resources that we have available, you know, going back to Tim's point about, you know, funding. So AI is essentially, as it was mentioned many times before, it's a business strategy tool. And using the words from IBM, they call it, you know, decision intelligence, right? So at our airports, you know, we're discussing how we can apply that to preventative maintenance applications, along with our consultant partners. So for vertical infrastructure, or what most know as the terminal building, we have a central utility plant, and that's essentially our central nervous system for all of our airport operations. So what we want to do, we're looking at how we can use the maintenance and replacement data that we have on hand, and, you know, how we can refine our approach to collecting relevant data in order to exercise, you know, pieces of equipment critical to our operation, like valves, right? If we don't touch a valve for a while, well, when it's time to address an issue, well, now we have a larger project on our hand. We can't just, you know, go in and test something. We now have to probably replace it because it hasn't been serviced in so long. Well, now we can collect that kind of data and understand when we're normally going in for maintenance and preventative maintenance, and understanding when we need to get ahead of it before issues like that occur. So that's an example. Flat infrastructure, once again, our pavement. So we are analyzing the feasibility of incorporating unmanned aerial systems, or drones, into our airfield inspection process. And we found that these high quality images that we can capture can offer a plethora of data. So if we can create a digital record of locations where we are observing recurrent pavement deterioration, for instance, then we can use AI to predict pavement rehabilitation and pavement reconstruction. And backing out of that, it helps us to better navigate the grant process so that we can receive the funding for that pavement rehabilitation and pavement reconstruction far beyond and before we need to actually go into construction.
Yeah, I'm reminded, Kiva, with the various, you know, constraints on airport operations, both on the air side and on the land side, and dealing throughout all of this with having to manage flows of travelers and security measures. AI really needs to be able to think 3 steps ahead in many scenarios. And, you know, Tim's scenario today, for example, is a point in case. Sometimes these natural disasters can occur and entirely disrupt existing standard operating procedures. So I think that that's something that I find really useful when we talk about operations. And Larry, I want to talk about operations with you too, because when I think about the building people and the work that you all do, I'm curious, in what specific ways has AI driven or could drive predictive maintenance to improve operational efficiency on the buildings you manage? Any success stories or takeaways about ramp ups to do this?
Yeah. Yeah, great. You know, Fernando, I'm going to reach back. I'm going to go back to, I think it was Joyce or someone at the very beginning, I think, mentioned the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab Study. And there's one that GSA led in, again, 2008, 2009, that has been foundation to the business case of smart buildings in the public sector. And it's still used today widely. But that study essentially built the business case for what was going to be the future of smart buildings and facilities operations of the future. And essentially what it said, and I don't quote me on verbatim, but I'll give you some numbers here. But essentially said for every 86 cents per square foot you invest, there's a 52-cent per square foot payback. And that payback represented both 9 cents per square foot in energy and 43 cents per square foot in labor or operating cost savings. So the investment model, the business case has been set for a long time. And the industry's been trying to follow that, quite frankly, to say, okay, so how do we get to that return on investment? So really, when you get down to answer the question of how's AI driven, predictive, and how has predictive AI and predictive maintenance been improved from an operational efficiency standpoint, you really got to pay attention to the labor, because the reality is not just GSA, but building owners and operators do a great job at the energy savings. In fact, it's pretty easily achieved when you target a 9 cents per square foot energy savings. That's actually, quite frankly, a low bar. So that's easily achieved with all the extra work that goes on. But let's pay attention to that 43 cents per square foot. That's the part where we're really, counting on change. And that change is, again, I said it earlier, and I'll probably talk about this later on if we get more time, obviously, around people. But that labor savings is, how do we focus on changing the way the operations and maintenance is actually delivered? The delivery model has to change. Doing facilities management in a traditional way, we always say, are you doing it in a smart building, or are you doing it in, I'll just use the term, a dumb building? And I don't mean it literally, but let's be real. You can't do things in a traditional way if you're trying to automate the buildings as sophisticated as possible. So where we're seeing really good examples is in GSA, again, I'll give GSA PBS is at the forefront of it, but really changing the way those operation maintenance contracts are written and taking the building automation component out of it. And that way there's, I'll say, the one throat to choke, or one piece of an accountability as a service provider out there who's driving the AI, the technology, the building automation tools, the predictive analytics behind it. The platforms are designed, they're rules-based, which is AI, right? And I'm really glad your explanation in the very beginning, where you talked about the difference in AI and generative AI. What we're seeing in the facilities operation space today is really AI, as you explained it earlier with your slide, and you had the side by side. We're not quite there with generative AI in the facilities operations world. Should we be? Can we be? The answer is yes, unequivocally, but we're not. But we absolutely can be. But right now, we're dealing with this major transformation still of trying to get the return on investment around the operational savings and the return on investment. And we're starting to see that change. And the way we're seeing that, and the success story really is changing the way we buy that business, changing the way the businesses or the services are acquired. You can't keep doing traditional, I'll say, commoditized facilities management solutions and buy it the same way. It's no different than if you went shopping for something. You're not going shopping, for today you're going for a smartphone. You're not going to buy a flip phone. You're going to buy the most sophisticated phone that's giving you the best technology and the most advancements, right? So in that same adage, you got to change the way we're buying the services and change the way you're either scoping it or thinking what the outcomes are. And I think the example we're starting to see is where we see those really hard, finite focus on the building automation specialist and building automation responsibilities being centralized and accountable in one way, so that they have the reporting capability and the achieving of savings on the labor front. To me, that's where we're seeing, and those are great examples. That's a great example of what we're starting to see, not just in GSA and other agencies as well. I wish we'd see it more, but it's an evolution. It's the Rogers adoption curve. We've got the early adopters and we've got the laggards, and we're seeing right now we're still in the early adoption phase, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, Larry, I was thinking about the segment on Baseline where I was talking about how AI can convert information into multiple languages. And I'm remembering that, I was recently visited by a relative. She's 77 years old. She has one of the dumbest phones out there. She doesn't want to get a fancy iPhone. She's got her little happy Android. And I'm reminded that sometimes senior people or older folks that might be in the facilities management space are similar to her, not quite as old as her, but they rely on cheaper technology for any number of reasons. So I can see that on the generative AI side, the capacity to convert complex technical terminology, especially as we get ever more efficient equipment upgrades that require more technical adeptness and more expertise. But it's kind of like what Kiva was also saying, you know, at the facilities level, there's certain things that some people don't check, but must be checked by people. And then there are things that need to be enhanced in terms of the routine maintenance cycles and intervals. So I can imagine a scenario by where taking existing historical data and doing some quick analysis on predictability of scenarios and then converting the action plans and the response plans into more accessible. I use accessible as a way of saying high school, early college, terminology, different grading level terminology that I think could be really helpful to be able to get more folks to actually continue to scale up some of the energy efficiency work. Tim, I know that I was really curious about how we started to, slide into the conversation about cost management and obviously, of course, efficiency as a connection to that. So I wanted to pitch another question to you. Also, I know that you're in a busy environment, so I appreciate you being able to be here. Considering the federal government's focus on sustainability, how can AI help energy service companies meet these goals while maintaining cost effectiveness?
Well, so I think it's going to be a joint effort. I think the government has to help us on one side and provide us information. I mean, there's a vast database of opportunities that the Federal Energy Management Program maintains that could be analyzed through AI to determine if there's a better way to try to accomplish fulfilling those things. But also, we've changed the way we use buildings, and that also impacts our energy use. So as we look at that, GSA, FIM, the federal government DoD can help us with understanding those new patterns of use that can help us to begin to predict how might we adjust those building schedules, operation, the construction plan in order to make it better optimized for the long run. On the other side, we always have known that the energy data reveals lots of information about what's going on in the facility. I think AI applied to that with the ESCOs involved can help us understand how we really can accomplish more savings than what we originally set out to achieve. I've always believed that measurement verification projects was both a combination of measuring the individual equipment performance plus analyzing the annual utility bills or the monthly utility bills, because when you combine those two, you reveal different types of secrets. Obviously, the equipment tells us what's happening at the equipment level, but the utility bill tells us overall what's going on in the overall building, that things that we may not even have touched with the project. And as we see those things come in, we can then have a reaction to those and affect those. And as we feed that information into an AI model, the AI can help us again predict that from the front end so that we don't have to wait for the back end problem to occur before we can repair it.
Yeah. And Tim, as we were talking about, federal portfolios and energy management and cost management, someone on the chat dropped a really interesting question that I think is very connected to this space, which is where at the federal portfolio, there are some privacy issues and national security issues that can't be shared on some of the commercial AI platforms, but yet the energy service companies are already operating with some of that information on their side. So there's already a bit of a protective wall between those entities. And so I can imagine a scenario where an enterprise level dedicated large language model, which is not the same thing as going to Copilot or Gemini, one of those external commercial AIs, but having a dedicated large language model with proprietary data, with the guardrails to protect, the various security elements of the federal portfolio, seems to me like ESCOs are the front guard of ensuring that the federal government can be assisted in integrating AI gradually because they already have the data security in place. Any reactions to data security and the concept around how ESCOs are adept at being able to start to manage that?
Well, I think that data security is going to be a big issue when you're dealing with federal agencies. And any data you feed into a model could become public. And so I think you have a challenge that you may have to have private models that you feed this with in order to maintain that data security.
Yeah, and I would even venture to say, I mean, in the airport environment, first of all, working at an airport, one of the first questions anyone works at an airport gets is, well, can you get me a discount for a flight? And no, we can't. And this answer, the extension to that answer will help you to understand why. So as the airport, we operate, but we have contract deals with airlines and with the restaurants, food, retail, beverage, concessions that are in the airport, as well as parking and any of the other amenities that anyone gets to enjoy while they're traveling through our facilities. And with that comes each entity having their own rules, policies, regulations when it comes to security, data management. Obviously, we all fall under the overall rules of the facility being under DHS through TSA. However, when it comes to data security, data management, it's all different from company to company, from airline to airline. And I really believe that we will have to come together in some sort of working group environment to understand what all of the different regulations and policies are, so that when we see that there's an opportunity to synergize and provide a better customer experience for our passengers, that we understand and we're also able to respect those guardrails that are around the data security parameters for each airline, each tenant, and other airline partners.
Right. Because at airports with so many terminals and so many aviation partners, there's a lot to really manage, especially with access to secured spaces by airport personnel, right? And
Absolutely.
how do you even do that today before
Well,
AI?
yeah, so I mean, a lot of coordination. We have a phenomenal operations and security team that meets with our DHS partners. I think they meet weekly just to make sure that we are always on the same page with any updates to executive regulation or changes in law or policy, so that we can make any changes that are necessary to our procedures as the airport, and also support them as best as we can. So we have a wonderful working relationship with them. And with that, as we look at these technological advances and ways that we want to expand our offering to our customers, that's something that we'll have to bring to the table and make sure that we have the right folks in the room. So expanding outside of operation and security, we'll bring in our airport technology and airport innovation group to make sure that we are having the conversations that we need to have. So currently, if there's a change on the TSA side of things, they bring us into the conversation so that we understand how their technology works and what they are trying to accomplish through security and screening. So for the airlines, the same thing. They bring their needs to us. If there's something that they want to bring into the facility, that we are able to support it. Right now, for many airports, they're using biometric technology, and that is some form of AI. So our job is to make sure that they have the infrastructure that's needed in order to support that technology. So it's an exchange, but once again, it's something that we have to be able to have an open dialogue about. And once we all understand what the rules are for each of us, then we can go off and have responsible dialogues.
Yeah. And I could imagine, Kiva, that with these working groups and multi-stakeholder working, meetings, that it's really essential to also get some fantastic transcripts and notes out of these things so they can be more actionable. And I already can envision that not only Teams from Microsoft, but Otterly AI, there are tools out there that not only capture all of the comments said in these meetings by attendees, but can auto-generate action items and tasks that are a result of the things that were discussed that people brought up as questions. So there's little scale AI that can be employed now, as much as the big stuff that has to do with, disaster preparedness, et cetera. And so the scales can be very, different. So I want to engage all of us, all panelists on this conversation as we dig a little bit more into data privacy and the ways in which people think right now about ethics. And so how do you ensure or could ensure that AI systems used in facility operations align with ethical standards and data privacy regulations? What kind of best practices can you share that are being deployed today, but could be optimized and enhanced with AI?
Yeah. Lawrence, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in. Thanks, Kiva. Yeah, so obviously, I see this with two sets of lenses. And one of them is, first of all the data that does go in does just require a human quality control check to make sure that the data is ethical, accurate, and free of personal identifiable information, right? And especially when you're talking about assets in a building and then the people around it. Generally speaking, folks are always worried about, are we violating the person's personal rights, privacy in the building? And I think one of the big conversations around AI, smart building sensors, is sensors around the building, right? And folks constantly having a conversation about, well, we've put sensors in the building. How do we know that the individuals aren't being identified? And there's a creativity model here that we've got to start thinking about bigger. I think that technology's come so far that there are ways that we can get real-time aggregate data about populations in the building, utilization in the building, that is absolutely, I will say, critical at this day and age. I mean, right now, if you start paying attention to utilization of a building is at 30%. Let's just call it, really probably less than that right now, if we're all being honest with ourselves. So let's call it 20% to be kind. A 20% utilized building, we have a vested interest to find those operational efficiencies, to find those cost savings, so that we can develop the best workplace possible. So I think transparent, the number one piece, and what we have found in customer dialogues is we know there's going to be, whether it's conversations as a partner, and it's funny, I talked about the importance of organizational alignment. Your HR and your unions are key to the stakeholders. They're a stakeholder. A lot of people have conversations, they say, oh, we have to deal with HR, or whether it's the union, and we say, oh gosh, I don't want to deal with that. Well, you have to deal with it and you have to hit it head on. But having the transparent conversation about what you're trying to achieve and why, and it's really about the best interest of taxpayer, best interest of cost savings, and driving savings across the enterprise that can be reinvested in other ways. Let's be real. If we save money in certain areas, that allows us to reprioritize, capitalize money in other areas that can be reinvested. That could be on employee development. It could be on other initiatives. It could be on bigger investments in capital. But I think sometimes we're afraid to talk about the most sensitive subjects, and we need to stop. Maybe we need to stop being afraid to talk about the uncomfortable conversations. I always say, let's be comfortable with the uncomfortable conversations so that we can get to the bottom line. And I think in this day and age, especially when it comes to facilities, real estate, and data around people, we're worrying too much about that component, and we're not being transparent enough about what we're trying to achieve. Rather, we're trying to fix something without hitting the problem head on as to why we're trying to achieve it. So I think transparency is key. And I also think dealing with accurate data is fundamentally the responsibility of the building owner, operators, so that whether it's the employees and the privacy of the data, people have confidence that that data is not being breached and it's not putting them at risk.
Kiva?
Yeah, that's spot on. So we currently have an artificial intelligence policy that's in draft, and it's under review with all of the CIOs and IT directors for each of those mode agencies that I mentioned before. So that's, highways, port, transit, airport. So once the policy is finalized, we will have the ability to explore the best way to engage with generative AI and machine learning in a ethical and responsible way. We've actually started looking into it, opportunities like this. This is important, being able to engage with industry. And, Lawrence, really, that was such a great point to not be afraid of it. Jump in and learn as much as you can. And honestly, that's one of the best practices that I can share, is that, make sure that you're not sharing anything that you're, with open source software that may result in a security threat to your organization, but at the same time, explore as much as you can to understand how the technology works and how it can really enhance the operation for your your industry. And our systems interface with National Airspace System information, as I mentioned before. So we have to be very careful with how we're interacting with the software. So our policy will require staff to verify accuracy before the information is published. And so we will still rely on our internal subject matter experts to analyze the information and make proper inferences about the data. But ultimately, my biggest piece of advice is still go out and interact as much as you can, but and definitely without sharing any secure and confidential information. and learn as much as you can. So I know I've been a sponge, interacting with industry and the private sector to understand what are they exploring, so that we are ready on the public side to engage as much as we can and make sure our policies make sense and that they match the expectations of private sector, and the most practical application of this technology.
Yeah, Kiva, I'm reminded that, when you mention, like important data or private data, sensitive data, all of us, I think, have grown up knowing that we would not want to share personal identifiable numbers, right?
Right.
Pins of any kind. You don't share your social security on the internet, for example. You don't log in with easily found passwords. And I think many of us that are tech users are aware of some baseline ethics around data privacy that would be personal to us. So I think it's an extension. I always think of AI adoption as a bit of a leapfrog into practices that we know make sense today, are not confusing, are not exotic practices. They make sense today to not share identifiable information. So certainly when employees or organizations are experimenting with AI, key to not disclose sensitive location information. But AI today, as the ethics lawyers and some of the policy folks are establishing those guidelines and the appropriate uses of AI at enterprise levels, I think uses of AI today that are important help just better processes be delivered in a more constrained window of time. So for me, when I hear both of you talk a lot about the ethical standards and data privacy regulations, I think as the bigger mission critical work is underway, there are some early things that I'm hearing, at each of your, organizations, you encourage your employees to experiment with today. Makes sense. And I think how do you all see supporting AI adoption in your organizations, helping with retaining and recruiting fresh talent into your organizations?
Well, we have we're gonna be doing a few things. The first thing, is creating opportunities. There are a lot of programs out there now for developing the skills necessary to develop within AI, so develop AI software, and also to understand the business implications of AI in an organization. We have staff right now. There's someone under one of our offices that's currently in school to receive an MBA focused on AI in the business environment. So it's, the educational system is evolving as this technology is evolving. And so I want to make sure that we are creating space for this skill set in our organization. We also have a sustainability plan that we are rolling out and we're acting on here at the airport. And one of the key components of that sustainability plan is creating a microgrid here at the airport. So we hope to be able to, obviously utilize our planning and environmental compliance and environmental planning efforts here that we already have currently within our staff and engineering to, move forward with the development of that microgrid. However, I would love for us to create a plan to interact with, have this infrastructure interact with the data collection and create a place where we can start to use that data for forecasting energy supply and demand variations, for managing complex energy structures and including renewable power generation and changing energy prices. Because, if we have more EVs, now at the airport, or as what we actually do have right now, we're actually converting a significant number of our buses, our shuttles, to electric powered vehicles. So we want to be able to have our own in-house microgrid to support that. And we're looking at automating switching between grid connected and islanded modes during utility grid outages and things of that nature. So that's one way that we want to be able to, definitely capture what's out there with regard to the skill set that the younger generation is coming in with. And we want to be able to put that knowledge to work so that we can continue to provide the best service to our customers. We also see an opportunity on the private sector side as we engage with BIM, as it was mentioned before, and other design softwares. We're looking at ways to bring AI tools into that Revit platform to help us with the design process, which could lead to less costly design because we're now designing at a faster rate. And, so maybe, condensing that design time will save the public side some dollars, to help with the overall cost of that project. And we have plenty of use cases. We have a lot of repetitive design. So we have the runways and taxiways, our hold rooms. That's the area probably that Tim was in as he was waiting to board his flight, our passenger boarding bridges. These are projects that are recurring over time. And so that's something that we see as an opportunity to start to look at ways to incorporate that type of software and that type of capability into our operation.
Mm, mm. Larry, what about you, sir?
Yeah, I think Kiva, you nailed it, is really investing in the base level of how do you train and develop. In fact, I will say that it's one of the things we're doing because and I'll just rewind. Yeah, I already explained that if you're going to see we need to see changes in the way traditional services are bought and sold, right? And we see a commoditization of facilities management as a service right now. But with automation, we can't be afraid to make the change now. The fear I have, quite frankly and bluntly, is that when you look at the labor force, when you look at our trades, the trades don't have the training and development they need to get that technology education they need. And it's more than just going to one or two classes. It's not AI 101 and then I learned it and I figured it out. It's a robust training and development program that is long lasting, evolution, and gives them something to work towards over the life cycle of keeping up with this technology. So to that end, what we saw was there's a major gap in our ability to do that. And when you work and we have a lot of operations and maintenance work, and we have a lot of union personnel on different unions across the United States that are represented. And unfortunately, they don't even have the training and development they need to get their skilled workforce up to speed. I don't think it's a secret that the labor workforce and the trades it's a tough market. It's probably one of the toughest times. I've been in this business 30 years. I will say it's probably the toughest I've seen the market, especially when it comes to skill set. And we're training and developing those folks who are excited to learn it. But there is no standard platform of learning. And one of the things we've invested in is building and adapting to a education platform that we know we can start to educate people, get certifications, have them work something. So it's, can we create a program and can we build off a program that gets you a junior developer after 5-6 classes, and now they know how to work that building automation system. So when Kiva goes to hire their building automation engineer and it's an engineer on their operations and maintenance contract, Kiva knows, we now have someone who's a junior developer. They were an HVAC tech, but guess what? They just got the certification, they got the training. That's one class. How can we build off that? So we've made an investment in that platform. We're launching it, but it's one of those things that we did it not because we wanted to go to market with it, was because we needed it for ourselves. We needed to start building a workforce for recruitment and build a workforce that could go deliver the services of what the complexity is of running smart buildings that are on AI platforms today. And again, and this is not something new, Fernando. Full disclosure, look, we've been talking about the 3 pillars of technology, buildings, and people is really the impetus for the challenges we face. But the reality is that people was the number one component to what we should have invested really in 2009. In hindsight, it shoulda, woulda, coulda. When I was a government executive, if I could wave magic wand now, I wish I would have made more investment around people that I'm talking about today. But you get so excited about the shiny object and the AI and the automation and the smart buildings and the connecting of the buildings and the results and the operational savings that we forget. But the reality is we have this tsunami of technology and tools that are right in front of us. We always said smart buildings won't put you out of a job, but not knowing smart buildings will. Same thing. AI won't put you out of a job. I know there's a lot of talk about, well, AI is going to replace people. Well, unless we start educating the right workforce and the people on the ground on how to use it as a tool or as a weapon to do their jobs better.
Yeah.
Right. So to me, that's how we're focused on transforming what we're doing. But it's necessary and overdue is probably the emphasis of what I would talk about here.
Yeah. Um, I have some reactions here real quick, but before I get into mine, I just want to just go ahead and let all of our attendees to today's event know, friendly reminder, would enjoy any of your questions on the chat. See if you've got any additional points that you'd like Kiva and Larry to mention here. I mean, I definitely have some concluding questions to bring up, but to touch base real quick with where we just were in terms of recruiting and investing in people, I see that not only is it a burden sometimes on organizations to take the time out to invest in folks, but perhaps it's an opportunity to more leverage the trade associations or external partners to come in and provide some of that skill building opportunity to integrate AI competency at the end of the day. So I'm reminded too that self-checkouts and the changes we've seen in that space of, many commercial companies out there scaling back on self-checkout because of theft or because of other issues, and returning back to human-powered checkout processes. It just reminds me that no matter the technology that we're talking about, at the end of the day, folks are still human and human behaviors are still part of the dynamic that AI can perhaps anticipate, but not often predict. And I do see supportive organizations that integrate AI into its operations and into its processes being very attractive, to the young workforce coming in. And especially as we're trying to sort out what the work from home balancing looks like, in the next 3 to 5 years, especially. So this is my way of segueing into talking about a little bit of what's coming up in time, and you know, seeing how you guys might think about AI evolving in the next 5 to 10 years with your respective fields of facility operations and renovation. What trends would you be paying attention to?
Well, this will kind of carry into that, to tie between the last discussion and now the response here. One of the trends, just to kind of, get to the point of the question, one of the trends that I see, as I mentioned before, about using drones, that was a great example, and how we are looking at how to utilize a different technology and collect data in a way that could help us with decision making in the future, and with our pavement management program, which is critical and essential to the operation of our airport. Well, we actually just had a conversation about this yesterday. So our airport is tremendously invested and engaged in investing in our people, and we have a program called the Advanced Leadership Program. And I had the opportunity and the honor of attending the final presentations for the participants of that program. And the participants range from people who have joined our organization 4 years ago to people who have been here for 25 years. And it's our way of investing in our employees. And one of the, when we had the conversation about the use of drones, there was a concern. It came up, just as Larry mentioned, about, well, will people lose their jobs? Well, instead of looking at it that way, we're looking at retooling, right? And retraining people to be able to utilize the technology that is now taking, on something that they did. So typically, in order for our operations personnel to inspect the pavement, they get in a truck and they drive the runway and they record it, or they take pictures wherever they can visually see something. Well, now the technology will allow us to do this more accurately, and also eliminate a disruption in any kind of air service in the event that we are waiting for planes to take off. So instead of saying, well, thank you, operations personnel, we don't need you anymore, now we can take that opportunity to train them and be able to operate the drone and become Part 107 certified to be able to
Right.
fly a drone in a commercial airspace. So what I see in a trend is that we're able to grow and invest in our people, which is critical to our organization. And I mean, Larry, you and I were right on the same page with that. I believe that you have nothing unless you invest in your people. So that's critical, and also just something that's near and dear to our heart here at BWI and Martin State, but also using their skills and finding ways to invest in our technological advancements, as well as how we are interacting with this technology. So we are constantly exploring and just remaining completely open and curious about what's out there. So that's what I see is for us, the trend is definitely going to be in our pavement management program and also our sustainability program. Any way that we can collect data on our energy usage and better ways to operate our facilities is going to be critical. And a lot of that was already discussed already.
Yeah, Fernando, I got great points, Kiva. And the only thing, I'll just put a button on it, and I know we're running out of time here, Fernando. So I think I said it earlier about making sure we have the right skill sets, the whole bit, changing the way we actually buy the services, the solicit services, so that we're asking for what we want for the future, not traditional services. And I think if I could put a button on it, and maybe we almost get away from the phrase of operations and maintenance, and we get into the terminology, we start calling it integrated facilities management, so that folks know this is not traditional services as we know it. And I think that the more we can get people to put a requirement that includes that, it's the build it and they will come, right? And that's kind of what, if I could wave a magic wand, and if for every RFP that came across, the industry, if it said that, I would say, oh my gosh, I'm excited. They're getting it. They're starting to see the transformation. But I also know that it's hard to get big organizations to change across the enterprise. So I think that we gotta start, getting the industry and the owners and operators to change the way they're buying the services overall and transform it to an integrated, technology and facilities management contracts. And I think that'll drive the demand for a different skill set of workforce, and people will start to invest more broadly on the people and the trades that are so badly needed. They so badly need the training and development.
Yeah, I mean, you're both adept and experienced business leaders, and it's rewarding and satisfying for me to hear how much you focus on the people dynamics and the user adoption of some of this work. And we have time for one very interesting question that showed up on the chat that I want to maybe conclude our session with on this one to both of you. An attendee was addressing the challenge of, let's call it noisy data, a lot of confusing data that already exists in legacy systems. So they are curious, do they have to hire a new person to quality assure all of the building data and then train the AI? And how long does it take to train the AI once all that's been accomplished? So I'm just curious, first we could start, how do you all today attack the challenge of data gaps, noise in the data, erroneous data? And then how would you advance that as you think about training AI with that data? How long do you imagine the curve would take to do that?
Well, for us, so you have to think about what you want, what you want in the end. So just to use an example, I mean, this isn't really directly tied, but I think the philosophy is the same. We have a strategic plan, and we go through this entire process, the senior management leadership, our directors, our deputy chiefs, our chiefs, and myself and others, our chief executive officer. We go through this arduous process of creating, we have our goals, creating our objectives, our initiatives, and then KPIs, right? Like, and making sure your KPIs are tracking something that's useful to you. So that's an example of how, if you're going to collect data, understand where you're going with it. What do you want to know? And that way you're able to ask the right questions and make sure you're tracking the right data. And how do we do that now? Well, we do it through different measures. Number one, our contracts. So every contract that we have with a consultant or a contractor, in the event that we have them, obtaining information on our behalf, we're very clear about the type of data that we need, when we need to have that data transferred to us, and how to report it. And then there's a systematic way of collecting, calling it, and using it in some way. So we have our engineering technology group, and they are pretty much our data managers. But it always starts with a question. is where are we going with this? What is the, you know, outcome that we want out of this process? So if you're just collecting data and you don't know what to do with it, you become data rich and information poor. And that's really important, not to collect so much that you don't know what to do with it. You have to start with the end in mind.
Yeah, I echo that, Kiva. I was going to say, start with the end in mind. Where do you want to be and reverse engineer it? But I think data for the sake of data is bad data. And you got to figure out what do you want to do with it? Where do you want to be and what do you want to do with it? And that's really the end state. So I would define it as figuring it out, your end state first, and work reverse engineer it. In terms of how long does it take to train somebody? You know, we're looking at to give you an example on facilities operations and technology and smart buildings. I can tell you there's a set of courses that we're looking at. And I think in 6 months, someone at the entry level could have some basic understanding and basic skill sets if they go through a training program. But I wouldn't put that one size fits all. I think it really depends on the skill set of the individual. And again, I'm specifically, to answer your question on AI based on the question that was asked, I'm focusing on operations and maintenance personnel. So that's not a generic 6 months to anyone. I think when we're looking at operations personnel, it could be 6 months, it could be 12 to 18 months, depending on how much technology they want to dig into and advancement they want to learn.
Yeah, I think that just to clarify, there was this interest in how long does it take to train the large language model. I'm not sure we have all of that information here today to be able to answer that specific aspect of the question. We're going to dig into that some more as part of our committee work, but I do think it sounds to me, Larry and Kiva, that, you know, when it comes to upskilling and retraining employees, that's basically a 1-year roadmap where folks can really level up and verify and validate that the training has been implemented and it's effective, so that they can continue to build up their careers. So with that, I'd like to say thank you so much to both of you, and a wave to Tim. He's probably flying now, a hi back to the DC area. And I'm going to transition us into our closing remarks, and I'm going to invite Larry and Kiva to drop off camera and Joyce to come back on with me. And Joyce, you know, wow, what a big day. It's already 2:33 p.m. Eastern, and we've had so many discussions. I know that you were really excited about a lot of the things that were said. So any takeaways or insights that you gained today that made you think ahead?
Well, what great panelists we had. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think what is really amazing is that we're dealing with a more or less newer topic around, you know, this new development, but it boils down to questions like the technology front and the people front.
Right.
So both are very important, and I'm so glad that each panel looked at that specifically. It sounds like there are definitely champion software out there that are ready to be deployed. And then we need champions who are non-AI brain, which is the human brain, to push that. And it, I think, goes back to many of the panelists' message is to just jump into pilots, try something, try training, both people and model and data. Get those results from pilot, and there are going to be mistakes along the way, but without those mistakes, we cannot do iteration. And without the iteration and feedback, we cannot produce the guardrail that the executive order really calls for. So I think a big takeaway is to get started, but be mindful.
Yeah. And, you know, I was, first of all, I feel like as far as encouraging folks to get started, in our very first presentation around baselines, and we talked about some potential uses, I think there may have been 1 or 2 ideas there that I ended up hearing throughout our conversations. The question about equity and inclusion and bias, that showed up a few times in the chat, and it made me think a lot about other comments that I was inspired to bring up during my panel related to, you know, different users and their comfort with technology. So I think getting started today will help people become more familiar with what are the immediate returns that AI can provide them to accomplish tasks that they're already doing. Meanwhile, at the enterprise level, there's a lot of chief technology officers, chief information officers that are exploring how to deploy large language models at the enterprise scale with API connections, because certainly OpenAI has connections with API, and large commercial providers like Salesforce and SAP are also doing the same thing. They're providing somewhat pre-trained models to enterprises, putting guardrails on them and some firewalling, and allowing those enterprises to drop in their own private data. I've heard something to the tune of 50K licenses per year, but that's just the technology costs, not the people costs involved. So there's quite a lot more still to learn about what it takes to implement AI solutions at an enterprise scale. But meanwhile, right now, whether it's $20 a month that people are paying for apps or access to premium accounts, or just using free versions of some of these AI tools. Hopefully today, all of the attendees, felt inspired enough to feel comfortable with starting to try some of these solutions, knowing that there's going to be a receptive audience in their organization seeking champions that will take on some of these pilot projects. With that said, I don't know, Joyce, any final comments before we bring Michael back?
Yes, I think that this work is ongoing. I think there is a lot of cost and capital planning questions that we would like to address in the next round. I hope that all of us think about it, and if you have feedback, please send it back to us.
That's right. Thank you so much, Joyce. Michael, if you're able to come on back, I'm going to go ahead and drop off my camera and stop sharing my screen and give it back to you, sir, so that you can adjourn our event for the day.
Sure. So before everybody leaves, I wanted to thank everybody today, from Steve Hagan, Sean Young, and Virginia Senf in the first panel, to Kiva Rodriguez, Larry Melton, and Tim Unruh in the second, and especially Joyce Lee and Fernando Arias, whose visions actually are why we had this session today. The Green Building Advisory Committee tackles topics like this, but not usually something as critical and topical as this so quickly as they did this time. We hope that this is just the beginning of our discussion about AI and federal buildings. I will also pitch the fact that the GBAC, or the Green Building Advisory Committee, meets on October 22nd at another public meeting. That meeting is hybrid, so in person and online, from 10 to 4 Eastern. And we'll be talking about topics like buy clean implications and health and wellness. I thank everybody and direct you to gsa.gov/GBAC for more information about the Green Building Advisory Committee. And also that email is for your questions that remained unanswered. And we will do our best to grab the chat and get back to folks from there. Best way to get us there is gbac@gsa.gov, or my email at michael.bloom@gsa.gov. But with that said, thank you to everybody. Thank you to all who attended quite an extensive meeting, and the meeting is officially adjourned. Thank you.